And joining us now for the second time in almost as many months, Mr. JayDyer. How you doing, Jay?
Doing great, Frank. How are you?
First of all, I appreciate your making an appearance on the show tonight because I know that you just got through with a 6-hour ride, you said?
Yeah, I was driving back from Nashville. I had a book signing and a lot of meetups I was doing in Austin. As quick as I could. I barely made it.
Hey, well, listen, you made it just on time, and I actually got to read a little bit more of this article over here that I put out there. The Time put out that tweet in the article about witches, how the fact that the resurgence of feminism and the popularity of the witch are ascending at the same time, and it is no coincidence. Now, there's a comedic side to that statement because yes, we know it kind of sounds tone deaf, but there is something a little bit more to that from the standpoint of what you dedicate a lot of your time and analysis to. So how would you start coloring in that picture for us as far as the rise of witchcraft, especially since we've seen it since the 2016 election?
I would say that if you look to the beginning of the ecumenical movement, you had this idea of importing a lot of Far Eastern thought. And this begins with the World Congress of Religions in Chicago in like the 1890s. And the Rockefeller family actually saw that this would be a key way to utilize religious movements and religions in general in America and in the West. So what they actually did was put a whole bunch of money into not just feminism in terms of its first and second wave with Abby Rockefeller. I think she donated the initial $30 or $40 million to get feminism going in the 60s. But they also, prior to that, saw the potential for buying off and utilizing religious movements, and particularly what's called ecumenism, or the ecumenical movement, where you blend all the religions kind of into one giant globo, watered down, new age type of religion. So the rise of the goddess is a big part of this, because if you look at writings like The Golden Bough by Sir James Frazer and other books that he wrote about the goddess, he was one of these key Royal Society figures who saw the potential for taking the goddess idea and basically inverting things from having like the masculine being kind of what's most important, and then that pairing with the feminine, rather you invert it and you have the feminine as most important, and that's seen as a way to kind of do black magic, you could say, against the patriarchal ideal. And in fact, some of the feminist writers even say this. They say that it's a movement against God the Father. Anti-patriarchalism is an attack on the idea of God the Father.
No, it's definitely coming out in every little way, shape, or form too. And as far as you're bringing up ecumenicalism. Oh God, can you say that again for me, please?
Ecumenicism,
okay,
or the ecumenical movement.
See, I hear that a lot. I listen to a few other theological podcasts and stuff. It comes up all the time, but there's just certain words that tie my tongue still, Jay. Where does the Pope's recent overtures tie into all of that? Because maybe about 2 months ago or so, right around maybe a little bit before you came on for the first time, we were talking about that almost like that interfaith compact that was being brought to the fore out there in I think in the Middle East or wherever the hell it was. That was very odd to me, just because it reeked of Agenda 2030. It just reeked of so many things, and of course, there is so much when you look at all the tenets of Agenda 2030. I mean, most of it is feminist drivel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, the papacy has been fully on board with this. They pretty much bought into the ecumenical movement since about a little bit prior to the time of Vatican II in the 60s. So, and by the way, the Rockefeller family actually met with the papacy. They had specific meetings about these topics. It kind of began with Benedict the 15th at the time of the League of Nations. He first said, okay, the League of Nations might be a good thing. Let's accept this, back at the time of World War I. And eventually the papacy caved on the religious elements, even though I think in 1928, Pius XI had an encyclical that said that this world religion stuff he called it apostasy. So even in the 1920s, the papacy still said this stuff was a threat, that it was a satanic inversion. And by the time of Vatican II in the 1960s, everything had reversed. And so basically the papacy fully endorsed this idea of all the religions kind of being generically the same, and maybe they're all kind of telling us, generic truths, basically Freemasonry type doctrines of what religion is. And so what we're seeing with Pope Francis and signing these accords with Islam is really just a manifestation of this whole idea that all the religions are basically the same. And ultimately, whatever you believe, that's kind of a denial of everybody's tradition, because it's basically saying that none of the religions are true. They're really just tools of these really money-powered interests.
Oh yeah, I would say across the board for anybody who takes their religion, their faith seriously, whether they be Muslim or Christian or what have you, I would have to imagine that pluralism is heresy to anybody, unless you're Buddhist or whatever. You're a little bit more on the earthly side of things, a little bit more on the, I don't know. It just makes a little bit more sense to me to see how all these different things are coming together from different parts of the globe. And I've been covering the rise of witchcraft not as I don't go in depth as you, because obviously you have so much more time actually studying the nuts and bolts here, but I've been noticing the trends in the media, especially since 2016. And we've even covered over here, maybe a couple of miles over, we have this one coven that operates in Brooklyn that have been casting hexes on Trump and all of his appointees from the get-go. I know, it's ridiculous, but these three things that I have noticed here, because we've already talked about witchcraft and feminism already, but there's something else that I've noticed that I would love for you to talk about a little too, and that is not only that witchcraft and feminism go hand in hand, but also this anti-natalism, this childlessness, the obviously that it plays into the narratives greatly. What kind of clarity can you bring to this picture? Because it is really all very anti-human on the face of it, and there's a very specific trope that is constantly being pushed on television, film, and the internet. And it's sometimes masked by the need to take better care of the environment so you're not having kids or whatever the hell else it is. But ultimately, the trope here is that children have been cast as inconvenient, oftentimes repulsive byproducts of sex. Of course, now sex, the only function of it is the orgasm. Children are byproducts, and they are oftentimes inconvenient byproducts. So those three things, the antinatalism, the witchcraft, and the feminism, they've really been going hand in hand. How can you, mold all that together and explain it a bit more?
Well, I would say that, by the way, sex has to be pee-pee in the poo-poo. That's the only way that's the only thing that's allowable. You can't put it anywhere else because that might lead to children. So it has to go in the booty. That's the only thing. And by the way, have you noticed that that's promoted everywhere? I don't mean to be too gross, but I think that's promoted on purpose. We've been talking about that for a long time. The work that I do, the stuff that I do. And there's a reason for that, because actually a lot of the hardcore occultists like Crowley, they were big promoters of that form of sexuality. He called it a specific type of rite or ritual of inversion as well. So it's not just sexuality that's allowed. There's only specific types of sexuality that are going to be promoted, and namely the ones that are barren and sterile. So what you're talking about with essentially the offerings to Moloch is another version of sterility and barrenness. And the reason for that, again, you can go back to the Rockefeller family, because when Abby Rockefeller was putting money into the feminist movement back in the 60s to get it going. This is, by the way, not my conspiracy theory. This is from Collier and Horowitz's famous book, the Rockefellers, their authorized biography. And they're very proud of all this. And so the antinatalism and the stuff that you're talking about, which really got going in the 1960s, again, same time as feminism, same time as the Cultural Revolution, this is being funded from the top down by very, very wealthy, powerful families who write and brag about this. This is why I do a globalism book series where I go through 28, 29 now of these top books of the globalists, and I lecture on each one of them, showing that they have a consistent teaching pattern, a consistent dogma. You have to hold the dogmas of globalism all the way down. Antinatalism, depopulation, that is one of the key dogmas that they mandate you adhere to. So you can look to even the goofballs in the 60s, the counterculture so-called people like Ginsburg. Ginsburg was doing all these hallucinogens, and he says, oh, when I was tripping out, I saw Molech, and Molech was going to have victory over America, because essentially kind of hinting at the offering of America's children to Molech. This is what he claimed. I'm not joking. He claims on one of his acid trips that that's what he saw. There's a poem about Molech that Ginsburg did. And was promoted as one of those key countercultural figures because he was seen as a way to have a kind of, I would call him a Luciferian prophet. A lot of those Tim Leary, Ken Kesey, these guys are like Luciferian prophets, and that's quite literally how they saw themselves, because they were at the behest of the big power elite, specifically the CIA, which is, you could say, the private army of the Rockefellers.
Wow. I mean, it makes perfect sense, especially bringing up Moloch.
By the way, can I add that if anybody doubts me, you can go to Jay Stevens, who's a mainline scholar, historian of the counterculture. He's not a conspiracy theorist. His book, Storming Heaven, that has the chapter on Ginsburg's Molech poem.
I was thinking about that today, too. I was wondering if I can find a way to even bring up how weird it was to see the Arch of Palmyra, pretty much the Arch of Baal, Moloch,
right.
That making its way, every time it makes its way across the globe in its appearance tours, it always shows up in certain places at really interesting times. And of course, during the 2016 election campaign time, around October of 2016, we had the Arch of Palmyra show up in New York City, the headquarters of both Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump's campaign. Of course, it was an election that was going to have huge implications for abortion in the future. And then, of course, again, it pops up in Washington, D.C., a day before the Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford hearing there. Of course, once again, because it's Supreme Court and it's talking about majorities that are going to be in place for a couple of decades. Another big implication on where is going to go in the country. And I know some people can say that is coincidence, but when you see something like that show up, the artifacts like that or recreations of something with that kind of a meaning, do you look at that as coincidence at all, or is it symbolic to those who need to know what the symbolism is?
Well, I don't know for certain, but I would say there's a good chance that it could have a ritual significance because, for example, I was just passing through Memphis and I had completely forgotten that. I mean, I remember the Memphis Pyramid, but I'd completely forgotten that the billionaire that had it built was this really eccentric person who, I'm not joking, you can look this up in mainstream news. Do you remember when Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls came out, which is a stupid movie, but
yeah.
do you remember when everybody was talking about crystal skulls?
Yep.
Yeah, so he actually bought one of these and had it placed in the black apex of the pyramid in Memphis, Tennessee. There's a little special treasure box where he had his crystal skull placed up there. I'm not joking, but that's true. It's a true story you can read about in the mainstream news, mainstream history of Memphis. And he did that because he had this kind of voodoo type of worldview. If you've ever seen that movie, The Believers, with, I think, Martin Sheen, have you seen that?
No.
Okay, you got to watch this movie because it's a little more of a B movie, but it's kind of like Eyes Wide Shut in the sense of there's this town, people are going missing, trafficking is going on, and basically there's the elite within this town, the millionaires, billionaires, they're all into voodoo. So I think that's very possibly real. Not all the time, but yes, the elite, many of them do believe that there's power in places that sites, ritual sites can be ritually, magically charged with energy, you could say. There can be artworks that are charged with dark energy in their mindset. So all of those things are very real from that perspective, whether we believe it or not. That is how they see it. So I would not be surprised if the Palmyra Gate was not intentionally, associated with the laws that were passed, and so forth in New York and so forth.
That makes me think about something else that I didn't think I was going to be bringing up tonight now, but we've been obviously covering a lot of UFO stuff coming out there, and it's obviously because the people who are bringing these stories to the fore. The first question that always comes to my mind and a lot of people who watch this show's mind is, what's the purpose of this? If it's out there, if we're being lectured to by Fox News and the Washington Post and the New York Times, then this is obviously sanctioned information. It's being controlled in a certain way. What the hell this is all about? And aside from talking about craft themselves and whether or not this is the U.S. government projects or whether or not this is something that is intergalactic or interdimensional, and whether or not interdimensional means we're talking about demons and angels and all that other stuff. The thing that I thought was really interesting about that, and damn, what the hell did we just say that triggered this thought of me? You just brought up, I lost it. But
well, I was talking about the movie The Believers. It's like elites doing
voodoo. Oh, right. Okay. So whereas people always talk about whether or not this is, what are the origins of these craft? What are the origins of these presents that people are seeing in the sky? Then again, there's a lot of people who point to Nazi Germany, and they point to the fact that this technology was known, the Nazi bell, this anti-gravitational stuff, and all these secret types of ideas. And at the same time, Hitler was going on a crusade throughout the world looking for religious artifacts, looking for things, once again, that are charged with a certain type of energy or influence. So could that have been, whereas we know that the Nazis were involved with these really foreign type of futuristic technologies, and at the same time looking for artifacts that would be considered occult to many people, would that give us a hint at what maybe the origin of this stuff actually is?
Absolutely. I think it's all the above. I agree with Jim Keith's thesis in his book, Saucers of the Illuminati, where he says that it's all the above. It's humans, and it's military psyops and technology, and it's something beyond probably demonic. So I think Jim Keith is right in that thesis. I think Dr. Farrell's books on the Nazi bell are correct. I've read those. And essentially, his thesis is that they had figured out some kind of like Tesla-type technology that they kept secret that eventually the Allies got a hold of. Now, where that technology originates, I guess you could debate. I mean, Tesla seemed to talk like he was getting his flashes of insight and information on wireless technology and all this stuff from an ether or a spiritual realm. And I know that he at one time was raised, I think, Serbian Orthodox. His family was Serbian Orthodox. And then I think as he got older, he got into weird kind of theosophy type stuff. So he probably thought he was getting his information from beings or entities. Whether that's true, I don't know. But I think all the above are true. In fact, I was just reading about the I forget there's a big tech billionaire guy who is into doing hallucinogens, and the book, I just bought the book because I was reading about it, and it escapes me what the title is. American Cosmic, I think, is the name of it. Okay. The book. And there's a guy who they talk about who, like many of these elite tech billionaire types, they will actually do hallucinogens. They'll do the hardcore consciousness altering type drugs for the purpose of interacting with entities by which they believe they're being downloaded. Now, I've had a bad acid trip before, and I know that I could see that possibility. I wasn't downloaded with any, formats for how to make hard drives or anything.
Perhaps they were getting guided through one of those ayahuasca trips. Then maybe something, I don't know.
I invented the floppy disk when I tripped. No, I'm joking. But I could see how that is possible because I did see some crazy stuff. I think it was demonic ultimately in my experience. But a lot of the people who are into that, and especially the people in Silicon Valley, the tech elite, even going back to the 60s, the generals that were involved in planning the internet, they were all tripping acid thinking they were getting messages from ET. That was quite literally. So I think that, yes, I think that is what's probably going on. That's probably the origin of the technology. I don't know if the Nazis were tripping acid, but
no. Oh, maybe.
I do think that they probably had figured out how the Foo Fighters stuff was working, how to do that.
You see, and then I think about that. I know Bilderberg was just also. I got to thank some people in the audience who suggested the We Are Change channel because that I completely forgot about all the Bilderberg stuff, and there's some great coverage of Bilderberg 2019 there. But you're talking about elitists. You talk about the Silicon Valley people who are always thinking about how to get new inspiration or how to keep themselves young. Just last night we were talking about once again how companies like Ambrosia are popping up, where older people or even middle-aged people are looking to consume or take in young blood to try to keep whatever the hell it is. And of course, one of the people rumored to be in on that was Peter Thiel. But that going on aside, that's just Silicon Valley. Getting back to generally what we were talking about tonight, which all ties in now that I realize it. But back in 2017, I was covering this on the show as well. People like Sally Quinn. These are people who are in the media. So you were bringing up Silicon Valley, of course, Silicon Valley, Hollywood, social media, the written media, entertainment, news, whatever it is. They're all in the same club. They're talking the same stuff. Did you read about Sally Quinn when she came out talking about how she's been casting hexes on people, and she stopped after the third person she hexed died?
Yes, I did read this. In fact, I reposted that. I think I covered it in a video back at the time when it was out. You're talking about, because she's in the Washington, D.C. kind of upper caste circles. And that's a great example of exactly what I'm talking about. If you got to watch the movie The Believers, this is why I cover Hollywood, is that Hollywood has told us the truth inadvertently for so many years. And she's a perfect example, because that's exactly what's going on in the plot of The Believers, is somebody like Sally Quinn, who's kind of in the DC socialite circles, who just openly, I'm casting hexes and boiling brews and eating bat balls and making you go crazy because I chew on bat balls.
I have one little thing over here from thecut.com. Listen to this paragraph. You can hardly throw a crystal without hitting some sort of witch-related content on the internet these days, and even Sally Quinn's getting in on it. The legendary Washington Post journalist, wife of the late Ben Bradley, and grand dame of D.C., hostessing, has a new spiritual memoir called Finding Magic, out next month, which she discusses various encounters with the occult. The Washingtonian recently profiled the 76-year-old Quinn and revealed a bit of what to expect from her. And that's when she goes into all the people who have actually asked her to cast hexes on people on their behalf because of how effective, apparently, she has been in her lifetime. And this is a celebrated Washington Post journalist. These are just the ones that get a little bit of the spotlight. I can't imagine what is going on, underneath the surface.
Well, let's not forget that if you think about publishing, all the big major publishing houses, I believe, my opinion, I think they're pretty much run by Satanists, because they have been promoting this stuff in bookstores for decades. The last 2 or 3 decades, it's been nothing but a cult. And now when you walk into a Books A Million or whatever, it's like the whole store has turned into the metaphysics witch section. It's like manga and witches. That's all there is that exists in the world, is freaking manga and witch bitches. And I think that that's on purpose. That's a social. And so people who were reading books have been, run through this ritual initiation growing up in the last 20 years. If you even go to bookstores, or if you're watching TV, you've got Sabrina, where they're doing like hardcore, satanic stuff, and Sabrina, the new version of Sabrina, Teenage Witch. And then you've got just the saturation of this in pop culture. So now when I see the articles on Yahoo and across mainstream media talking about how millennials have completely embraced witchcraft, Witchcraft is Wicca is the religion of the millennials, they don't realize that it was actually the Crowley student, Gerald Gardner, who created Wicca. It's not a real ancient religion. It's a made-up religion by a dude who was the student of Crowley. So actually Wicca is a kind of lower form of Crowleyanism. And that's really what this is about, is kind of inducting everybody into that.
So they took over the cultural institutions, and there's just been well-placed conversations and very cuddly.
The zillionaires that are basically funding it all.
Yeah. No, I see it. Jay, I got listen. I know that you're tired. You've been doing your thing, and I'm glad that we got at least a solid half hour in. I can't wait to do this again. I think that from what we covered tonight, it was a really, really great spot.
Yeah, I want you to come on my channel as well sometime.
Oh,
I'd be honored to have you and interview you.
You let me know what you want to do, and I am there. Okay.
Awesome.
So with that being said, Jay, why don't you let everybody know all of your websites, where they can find you? I'm sure there's plenty of people. I have one person over here, Jameson Smith, who's put in a super chat and said, "Big thanks to JayDyer for introducing me to Orthodox Christianity." So cool. Awesome. you definitely have a lot of people who already are on board with you here.
Cool, man. Yeah, well, I cover a lot of topics like you do. I cover Hollywood a lot. I cover philosophy, theology. Cover geopolitics on the big kind of meta scale. So I do all that, and then we do a lot of comedy and satire too. So if you want to get my books, I have a shop at the website, jaysanalysis.com. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel. We just hit 40,000, so I'll be doing some shows this week about hitting the 40K. And my TV show is called Hollywood Decoded, and you can watch that at Gaia TV. So that's my main outlets there. I think most people, if you like movies, you would enjoy my 2 books.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your ongoing work, Jay. It's all great, and I can't wait to talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, man, and thank you for being patient while I was late.
No problem. No problem. You're hustling. That's what we need in the world. Hustlers, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.